I'm seeing more and more folks needing help with their digital assets, right? We with the rise of crypto and, even down to, simple things like our social media accounts getting into our iPhones, right? So many people um, are coming to me with this, and, I've helped families on the back end in probate having to get court orders just to access their loved one's Gmail account. You know what I mean? And so much of what we do is linked to online. And so, I thought it was just very, very important for us to kind of take a step back and kind of take inventory of our assets in general, as we do as planners. Um, but it's interesting because, a lot of us don't think about, our digital presence as assets, right?
Right,
So no,
right.
I'm
Yeah.
glad that stood out to you.
Hi, my name is Reen. Sounds like green. I'm a Minnesota-based realtor helping families get through probate with more money and less stress. Today, I'm joined by Jamy Barreau. Jamie is an estate planning attorney out of Florida, and he does business in Florida, Minnesota, and DC. He's the founder of Barreau Legal, and he's the author of the Amazon best-selling book, Peace of Mind, Piece by Piece, Crafting Your Estate Plan. Jamie, thank you so much for joining us on Probate Help Desk today.
Thank you, Reen, for having me. So happy to be here.
And Jamie, could you just tell us a little bit about some of the work that you do as an estate planner and why you chose to get into this line of work?
Yes, well, as a young attorney coming out of law school, I was relegated to a lot of different tasks, right? Areas of law. But what
Hmm.
struck me the most talking to potential clients coming into the firm were the estate topics, right? So, for instance, as a young attorney, I spoke with a family who was grappling with some issues with property taxes for their home. And
Mm.
in looking at the deed to their home and seeing, checking out who's it titled in and who's the owner, it turns out the original owner was their grandfather who took title of the property back in like 1930, right? And so, if you could imagine, generations had gone by and nobody had changed title, nobody had gone through that probate process. And it just made me start to wonder and think, well, how many other folks just don't know? And so it became very, very interesting to me learning about this area of law and wanting to go out and teach folks and help folks avoid, the hassles that would come with probate.
Jamie, that is a great example. As a realtor, I come across families a lot who someone passed away and in many cases, there is a will, so they assume they don't have to go through probate. And
Yes.
they continue to live in the house, maybe make the more well, they would make the mortgage payments or they wouldn't continue to live in the house, right? But they're living in the house, they're improving the property, they might live there for 10, 20, sometimes even 30 years. And then when they go to sell, they realize that the home is not in their name.
Mm.
And going back and trying to fix it in Minnesota, um, we can fix it, but it's a little bit more challenging than if they had just gone through probate in the first place, or even better if they had an estate plan.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I feel like you run into issues like that that are even more striking when you're dealing with folks who don't have, let's say, a type of legal relationship, right? So let's say you have significant others who've lived with each other. I've had clients in the past where they lived with their significant other for many, many years. They've built a family together. They've built a life together. They have children. And in this particular case, the husband passed away after 30 plus years of being together. And excuse me, I didn't mean the husband, but the male
Hmm.
partner passed away in this couple. And the significant other, the surviving significant other, unfortunately had no rights to the property. Her name was not on the home. And so now we were in a situation where we had to pick up those pieces. And it's even more of a reason why folks need to get planning in place to make sure that things go the way you want them to.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's just take a moment and talk about your book. And I mentioned to you that I read the book, and I wish I had this book when I was a personal representative, or even even before I was a personal representative. Because you one of the stories you shared in the book is you talked about, well, you talk about some of the reasons why people think they don't need to have a plan, and I was in a family like that where my father didn't think he needed a plan. He thought that we would just figure it out and everything was being left to only two of us and it would be easy. Well,
Mm.
that put all the burden on me and my sister as the heirs and personal representative. Um, so if you could just talk a little bit about what inspired you to write this book.
Folks, my colleagues will laugh at me because truly the what spurred on my interest in writing this book was a spat I got in with somebody on social media.
Mm,
So we had a situation where a quote unquote financial advisor, uncredentialed financial advisor, was providing advice online, and basically in telling people to create an irrevocable trust and
mm,
fund it with all of their assets. And it was unsettling to me because, while an irrevocable trust is a strong tool and has its benefits, it should be used in very, very specific situations. But what struck me even more was this post was gaining a lot of popularity, a lot of comments, a lot of likes, and a lot of lay people who just took this as gospel. And
mhm.
so, in going back and forth with this individual to try to educate them about, the perhaps the dangers of the type of advice they were giving, it made me realize, well, this may have been one battle, but there's a lot of misinformation out there online. And so, it spurred me to not only just write this book, but really just to increase my goal of educating the masses as much as I could.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I learned reading this, I thought I knew this, but then when I read it and the way you presented it made me look at it from a different perspective, was that there are many ways to avoid probate in addition to a trust. One way is a trust, but you actually go in and talk about other ways that you could avoid probate, and the path you choose might depend on your family, the wealth, and your goals. And I just found that really amazing. You also talked about different groups of people who could benefit from doing estate planning, which might be a trust or might be some of the other options you talk about. Who do you think would benefit most from reading this book?
Well, that's an excellent question, right? And really, I think anyone would benefit from reading this book, right?
Hmm.
One of the common misconceptions is that estate planning is for those who are, older or those who have health issues. But really, and what I'm finding through my practice is not only is that not true, but I'm finding in my practice that, the majority of my clients are younger, right? They're building up their families, they're building up their businesses. And the important thing to think about is this: if you have uh, a wish, a desire, um, if you have assets of any kind, big or small, right, you would benefit from this book because now it's going to start a conversation for you, right? About, well, what if something happens to me? Where do I want those assets to go? Or what if something happens to me? Who do I want to step in to make decisions on behalf of my estate? Um, and so, one big thing that I mentioned in the book is that, and I say it often, is if you don't have a plan, the government has a plan for you, right? And the
Yeah,
question becomes, are you comfortable with that plan, right?
right.
And so, that's definitely what I would say. I really think that, anyone would benefit from having a look at this book.
I agree. And again, you broke it down into these different categories. Maybe people who have assets or wealth that they want to protect, other people who might want to come up with a plan for what happens if their young children are left without parents. And one of the things that my wife and I talked about was that this book inspired was having a plan for our adult children in case they become incapacitated and we have to take care of them. We've
Mm.
always thought about estate planning from our own perspective, making sure that our estate is in order, but we never really thought about what happens if we have to get guardianship of our adult children or do something. So that was a light bulb that went off in our head when we read the book. So I really
Absolutely.
encourage people to read this. You cover it from so many different perspectives. It's fantastic. Another topic that you covered in this book that I had not thought about is the succession planning for your business and including
Mhm.
that as part of an estate plan. You're one of the first attorneys I've ever seen really discuss that topic. Could you share a little bit of that with our viewers?
Yeah, well, if you could imagine, if you're running your business, and let's say you do have employees, right? The question then becomes, well, what happens after you pass away, right? Who's going to
Mhm.
be signing the paychecks until, it's time for the new owner to come on board, whether that business is being liquidated, what have you. Um, if you're in a partnership with somebody, right? Will your estate have enough money um, to basically do the heavy lifting through the process, the probate process, if needed, to make sure that these things can happen, go down. But and additionally, if you do have a partner, will the business have enough money, or will your partner have enough money to buy out your estate? Right, buy out
Mhm.
your estate's interest, right? And so some things that we consider are things like key man insurance, right? Making sure that there's some money to not only benefit the business and keep it moving, but also benefit your family, make sure they're compensated for now, what you're not earning from the business anymore now that you've passed away. So it's definitely something strong. That folks need to consider. And again, whether you have a large business or small, right? And depending on your state, there's some simple things that can be done, right? Um, Internal documentation, operating agreements, bylaws, these things could be put in place to make sure that your family, your business, your employees can keep going as smoothly as possible in the event something happens.
Absolutely. And I have also run into clients who um, one of their parents passed away and left a business, and they were trying to decide if they were going to continue on or liquidate the business, and they weren't sure what their obligations were as it related to some of the contracts that were already in place. Now I don't know if they were a sole proprietor and I don't know what kind of entity they had, but um, it sounds like in your planning, you ask those questions and take some of those things into consideration.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I tell folks all the time, right? Not only is estate planning, it's not a DIY project, right? And also, it's not a cookie cutter project. It's got to be unique to your particular situation. So perhaps, these strategies that I've thrown out there, like key man insurance, maybe that wouldn't have been a good fit for, your colleague that you mentioned there, right? But it's very, very important, to sit down with a planner, an estate planning attorney, rather, just so you can give them the relevant facts. They can gather up your goals and then craft out a plan so that we can accomplish those goals efficiently.
And Jamie, when you're putting together a plan like this, do you also work with the family's financial planner, or is there a sequence? Do they start with a financial planner, then come to you? Do they start with you and then go to the financial planner? How do you bring that all together?
Absolutely, absolutely. I believe that it should be a collaborative process, right? And so when you have your accountant, you should bring your accountant to the table, your state lawyer to the table, your financial planner to the table. If you are using a realtor, right, one that you trust, bring them to the table, right? Because while you may have the best estate planner in town, you might have the best CPA in town. If we have the CPA handling your tax planning on one hand, and then now you have your estate planner working on your Medicaid planning. Well, there's some very significant strategies that we
Mhm.
use as estate planners that can really have heavy effects on your tax plan, right? And if your professionals aren't talking to each other, well, that's not in your best interest. So I typically invite my clients, let me know. for your professionals. Let me know if I have permission to speak with them, and then I bring them to the table so that we can collaborate and make sure that all the hands are talking to each other.
Absolutely. And Jamie, you mentioned Medicaid, and one of the things that I come across as a real estate agent who specializes in probate is I sometimes have clients who don't realize that they need a certificate of medical clearance related to their Medicare, Medicaid issues or account. I'm sorry, I'm not sure the best terminology, but uh, in Minnesota, I think you know what I'm talking about. What advice do you have for people who might not have thought about Medicaid and how that's going to impact their estate?
So my biggest advice to folks is don't think it's too early to start thinking about what your Medicaid plan is going to look like, right? Because there's a lot of strategies that we can take on as estate planning attorneys to help you qualify, but a lot of them have consequences if you don't put them in place early enough, right? And so, we could utilize special types of trusts, for instance, right? But the Medicaid office, they have a look back period, right? So, depending on how soon or before you apply for benefits that you implement some of these plans, that could serve to your detriment. So my biggest advice is, even if you're healthy, and not really thinking about the need for long-term care, consider sitting down, speak with someone, right, and see, hey, what can I do now, and how can I set myself up for success in the future?
Absolutely. And Jamie, another item that you cover in the book are some of the myths associated with estate planning. And I wanted to just kind of go, there were five, and I wanted to just kind of go through those myths and share them with our audience and get your thoughts on them. And the first one, I love them all, but this one, number one, myth number one, I'm too young to need an estate plan. Talk a little bit about why you see that as a myth and what people can do to overcome it.
So your estate plan is meant to be living and breathing, right? So it should grow with you, right? And unfortunately, we don't know when tragedy is going to strike, right? So you may be young, you may be healthy, but the question becomes, what if? What if something happens? Um,
Mhm.
we've seen many, many cases in the news throughout, the years where, relatively young people, they become, unfortunately, incapacitated, right? And so if this happens, do you know who would be the next person to step in line to care for you, right? If you're young, you may have young children, right? So if not for yourself, think about it from the perspective of, well, who's going to care for my kids? And again, if I don't have that plan, the government will have one for me, right? Does
Right.
that mesh with what you'd like? So definitely, it's never too young to start thinking about it.
And then myth number two, I feel is related. And myth number two is I don't have enough assets to justify an estate plan.
And so, I'm so glad you're mentioning these things because it's true, right? It is a common myth, right? I don't have it. That's the number one thing my clients will tell me. Well, I don't have an estate. Well, yes, you do, right? Even if you have a penny to your
Right.
name, that is what you own, and you have the right to guide that wherever you'd like to go. And I'll even add this, right? There's a lot of power that comes with these documents that we prepare as planners, right? For instance, a power of attorney, right? Allowing a third party to step in your shoes. Um, During your lifetime, if you can't speak for yourself, if you can't act for yourself, you can have someone designated to, let's say, bring a lawsuit on your behalf, right?
Mhm.
So you may not think you have much now, but in terms of protecting your rights, protecting your legacy, that's invaluable to have that power, to have somebody else step in seamlessly to manage that for you. And I'd even add this as well. Although, let's go on the topic of a will, for instance, right? Although a will, commonly people think that, yes, we use that to transfer our assets to the next of kin or whoever you want, really. It also comes with other important things like who's going to be in charge of my estate after I pass away, personal representative, executor, what have you. And, suppose your estate needs somebody with that authority, someone you want to have somebody you trust to manage your estate, file or defend any lawsuits after your passing. So it really, can't stress enough, you don't want to think of it as I don't have a certain dollar amount because the dollar amount doesn't really matter.
Absolutely. And one of the other things I would mention is you also have several options for estate planning. So, for example, before I read your book, I thought of estate planning as putting together a trust. But you give a lot of other options for avoiding probate and managing your estate based on your needs and your age
Mm,
and your income level. Um, and so even if you think you're too young or you don't have enough assets, you still have options which will help a family to avoid probate, which tends to be very costly.
absolutely. It can be debilitating for heirs, the probate process. Um, and I'm so glad you mentioned the fact that there's many options in estate planning, right? And
Mhm.
that's something big I love to educate people on, especially through the book, simply because although I am a big trust plan advocate, um, it may not make sense for everyone, right? It might be overkill. And, I want people to know, or I wanted people to know through the book, we have many, many options available to us. And, yes, a trust can be, um, it might be overkill, it might be expensive for that particular situation. Um, but we have plenty of other things that we can do to accomplish your goals.
Absolutely. Another myth in the book, Piece by Piece, or Peace of Mind, Piece by Piece, is once I create a plan, it's done. I also believed this.
Well, it's true. I mean, at least I call it the first big step, right?
Mhm.
Because again, your plan is meant to be a living, breathing thing, right? It should evolve with you. I tend to tell folks, consider updating it every 3 to 5 years. You certainly don't want stale documents. But not only that, um, depending on the type of planning you do, you may need to do more, right? So if you did do a trust, you need to fund that trust. You need to transfer assets over to that trust. If you're not going with a trust-based plan, you may want to stick to, some beneficiary designations on financial accounts. So just because you finished your job with your estate attorney and you signed your documents, your job isn't over. It needs to continue on from there.
Definitely needs to continue. The next myth is very personal to me because my father said this to me before he passed away. I don't need an estate plan because my kids know what to do.
Yes, yes, yes. I've heard that many, many times. And it's interesting, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen in the future, right? I've seen families who have been completely unified, completely shaken and changed by, someone's passing. And so now, once, for instance, we have families who are tight knit, close siblings. And now that dad's passed away, now all of a sudden we're fighting over towels, right?
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and, it's never really about the towels. But at the end of the day, the point remains um, you may think everything is going to go smoothly, but, life has a way of playing out, right? Um,
Right,
and I leave folks typically with this, right? If you have it documented, you have your wish, there's no questions, right?
right, right.
So now there, it'll minimize quarreling. At least that's the hope. That's the goal.
I really appreciate that. And in our family, my mother watched the toll that going through probate took on my sister and myself, and so she gave us the gift of setting up an estate plan so that
Mm,
we don't have to go through that. Now, I still go through it, helping other families go through it, but I'm so grateful to my mother for taking the time to set up that plan so that we know what her wishes are and we know what to do. Um,
absolutely.
and Another myth from your book, Peace of Mind, Piece by Piece, is estate planning is too expensive and too complicated.
It can be. It's not a simple topic, right? I myself, went through law school, went through extra law school just to focus on this particular area of law. So if you can imagine, it can be tricky, and that's understandable. But that's why you have people like me, right? I'm
Absolutely.
happy to explain these things and walk families through it. Um, and my biggest comment to folks that describe it as being too expensive, think of it as more of an investment, right?
Hmm.
Simply because the money you put forward to do proper planning, right? Key term is proper planning ahead of time, um, pales in comparison to the amount of money you'll spend, or rather your family will spend going through probate, right?
Yes.
Probate can cost, could potentially cost an estate tens of thousands of dollars, can take a lot of time. And if you can imagine now, that's eating away at the inheritance that would come down to the kids, for example, or maybe a surviving spouse. So um, keep in mind, or your significant other. So while yes, it's an investment on the front end, just know it pays off tenfold if you're trying to save yourself from going through probate on the back end.
Absolutely. And one of the other things that you've mentioned is just knowing what the person who has left us wanted.
Mm,
I have seen cases where maybe they articulated one thing to one child and another thing to another and something else to a cousin, and then everybody gets together and they argue about what the decedent really wanted rather than actually having something in writing. So it's invaluable. It's an invaluable gift to your family. Uh,
absolutely.
and Jamie, there's one other topic you covered in your book that I have not seen covered anyplace else when it comes to estate planning and probate, and it is this new growing area of digital assets. And you actually take into account digital assets when you put a plan together. I've not seen that before. Can you talk a little bit about what you do and why that is so important?
Well, what's interesting is, I noticed over the years, um, if you could imagine, our digital assets are very, very important to us. But I've noticed over the years, working with families in probate, that let's say, oh, well, I can't get into mom's Gmail account, right? I can't get into her phone, right? And then it becomes upon us as probate attorneys to go down, handle probate, get a court order so that we can get access to those things. And so then the question becomes, well, how do we implement that or include that into an estate plan so that that process can be as seamless and as court-free as possible, right? And so a lot of what we do in that is making sure that your beneficiaries have access your to your account. So making sure that your passwords are secured in a location where they can find it when the time comes. Some companies, like Apple, for instance, they will allow you to name basically a beneficiary to your account, right? And so if you do go to Apple, fill out their forms, they'll have authority to turn over your account to the person you named as the beneficiary, as long as they filled out forms and submitted your death certificate, right? So
Yes.
of course they're keeping your privacy in mind, of course. So these are it's most important to be intentional, right? Intentional about your online footprint, your online data, and your access to your accounts, because it's part of your legacy, right? Especially now with the emergence and the growing of Bitcoin. There could be incredible value in those platforms, and you want to make sure you can guide that as efficiently as possible.
Absolutely. And even as we think about younger people who we might set up an estate plan for, a lot of them now have crypto accounts and digital wallets and all of these other digital assets that if it weren't written down, it might be very hard to find them. So I
Absolutely.
love your tips in that space. That is And I would imagine that we're going to see more of that in the coming years as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I've been partnering with a number of companies where they're dedicated to making sure that folks' online identity is protected, right? Not just during their lifetime, making sure everything's organized, but making sure they have systems in place to pass their online footprint on to the next generation.
Absolutely. And Jamie, as we wrap things up, any parting thoughts or advice that you would like to leave our viewers with?
My biggest thing is to make sure you have a plan, but not just any plan. Make sure you team with a licensed professional in your jurisdiction who is experienced and can speak to you freely about different estate planning strategies for your particular needs, right? So you may have been speaking to your family, speaking to your neighbors, your friends, your loved ones about what they have in place. But it's more important for you to focus on your own needs and your own goals and make sure that you find an attorney that's comfortable tailoring a plan for your needs.
Absolutely. And Jamie, your book is called Peace of Mind, Piece by Piece, Crafting Your Estate Plan. Where would you like people to pick it up?
You can pick it up on Amazon. It's available in digital and print form.
Excellent. And I'll even mention if you do pick it up on Amazon, if you have the Kindle Unlimited, I think I saw it in Kindle Unlimited, so it's free if you have Kindle Unlimited.
It's free if you have Kindle Unlimited, and I'll even add this: if you sign up for my firm's newsletter, we'd be happy to send you a complimentary digital copy as well.
Oh, excellent. Well, Jamie, I will include a link to your newsletter in the show notes. And I really appreciate that. I highly recommend everybody to pick up a copy and read through it, and then let your family read through it, let your kids and your parents read through it. It's an easy read. I was amazed at how you took such a what can be considered a complicated topic and you made it so easy to understand. I really appreciate that, Jamie.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm so glad you had an opportunity to read it.
And Jamie, in addition to the book, how would you like people to get in touch with you?
Please, by all means, feel free to reach out to us on social media, Barreau Legal, at BLegalFL. You can reach us at our website, BLegalFL.com, and we'd be happy to get in touch and set up a time to speak if ever you have any questions.
Excellent, Jamie. We will include those links in the show notes. And I thank you so much for joining us today, Jamie. It's a great book. I appreciate your work. I appreciate what you give back to the community online, and I'm just honored that you're here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.